Welcome to a solemn episode of House of Decline, where uh, usually I'm not one to talk about the news or heavy politics and stuff, but this is the only thing that's been on my mind for a big while. Of course, it's the current conflict between Israel and Palestine that's going on, where Hamas attacked Israel and there were a lot of casualties. And then Israel responded, as they always do, with exponential retaliation in what seems like is an encroaching genocide. They've already outnumbered the Israeli casualties by a huge margin, not to mention shutting off the water and electricity in Gaza and using various war crime tactics and white phosphorus against them as well. It's a really bad situation. I want to make it clear up top at the episode that I am pro-Palestine. I don't stand with Israel on this. However this current conflict started, the roots of it go back many ways. And while I should be elevating Palestinian voices, and something that I should do right up top, you could listen to the rest of the episode, but donate to the PCRF, the MAP, donate to any of those that you can find the relevant Palestinian charities online. The most notable ones are the MAP, the Medical Aid for Palestinians, and the PCRF, the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. We'll have links to charities in the show information. So
in UNRWA
there. And which one?
UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency.
That's a good one too, Jeremy. Yeah. And that's our guest for today, is Jeremy Appel.
Oh yeah, hi. Sorry, I botched the intro.
You don't. Who cares? It's conversational. It's we have a laid back quality here. Even though I tried to do a sort of professional thing because stuff is bad and I don't want to make light of it. I don't want to get too jokey or anything right now. Still, we'll talk about it in a conversational way. But this is Jeremy Appel, journalist, longtime friend of the show. Follower of this of these events, because we're both very invested in it because we're both Jews, and so tell me about that. Tell me about how you came as a Jewish person. Were you initially indoctrinated into believing that Israel was good and then had a reckoning with it, and what was that like?
Yeah, no, I came from a very Zionistic upbringing. My grandmother was a survivor of Auschwitz. Her husband, my grandfather, fought with the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II, killing some Nazis. Very proud of him and her. Amazing people, but they were, I guess, understandably, extremely Zionist. That was seen as sort of their, they saw it as a redemption arc, which I think a lot of people, a lot of like Jewish boomers, like the kids of that generation do.
Yeah.
Right.
Not a revenge arc, but we will make a shining city on the hill thing,
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, how it was perceived in much of the Western world. Actually, my grandparents, they met Menachem Begin when he was like the opposition leader in Israel in the 60s. They have a signed copy of his book, The Revolt, which is quite revolting. Mm-hmm. The book. Very, Begin was sort of the right-wing revisionist Zionism that was more, it wasn't all that different from the sort of more moderate labor Zionism that founded Israel, but it was more, I guess, mask off.
Yeah, there is a difference between Ben Gurion and that guy.
Yeah, and especially on domestic matters, right? Yeah. Like labor was like social democratic. But I mean, until now, the worst crimes committed in Israel's history were done by the Labor Party, right? The Nakba. But Anyways, that was I digress. So I was raised, Israel is great. I went to a Jewish day school where, it was drilled into our heads
Mm-hmm.
that Israel is great. The Arabs hate us because people just hate Jews. It's part of this historical continuum
Mm-hmm.
where
Yeah.
it's just us and them, and them is everyone else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of course, coming out of Auschwitz, that being part of my grandmother's worldview is like totally understandable, um, and my parents as well. I mean, yeah, and right. I mean, like
Yeah,
also
when you're
for
so close to a genocide yourself, the desire for security at any cost is very understandable.
right, and it creates blind spots. Actually, her parents were like, um, I mean, they were pro-Soviet immediately after the war. Like they were socialists, but then 56, like the crimes of Stalin, or alleged crimes of Stalin,
Yeah.
are addressed by Khrushchev, and I think they shifted their sort of ideological inclinations towards Zionism, which
Mm-hmm.
at the time,
Yeah.
like going from Soviet Union to Israel now seems like going from one extreme to the other. But
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I mean, again, Israel was nominally socialist, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
kibbutzes
Yeah.
were they
They
were
were afraid
collectivists, but
Israel
they
were commies. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, and that's why America wasn't enthusiastic about Israel. I mean, my partner's been rewatching Mad Men, and I've sort of just
Yeah. There's a whole sequence in Mad Men about them doing ads for Israel.
yeah, and they're just like, I don't know, sounds like some commie bullshit to me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, it was Eisenhower in 56 who threatened to cut off aid to Israel after they invaded Egypt with Britain and France, right, to try and
Mm-hmm.
topple the nationalist president Gamal Abdel Nasser. But anyways, I went to Jewish day school. We were taught Israel was amazing. That falafel was an Israeli food,
Yeah,
which
that's one of the most fucked up lies. That's one of the most fucked up pieces of Hasbara is falafel is an Israeli food. No, we didn't.
well, it's just no. I mean, it stems from the fucked up Hasbara lie that
Yeah,
Jews are indigenous to
right.
Palestine, which totally obscures what indigeneity means in practice. And I mean, you go back to the early Zionist figures like Theodore Herzl, who
Mm-hmm.
was explicitly like, yeah, I want to create a colony for Jews in Palestine, and I want the support of colonial powers to do it, right? We're going to create an island of civilization in a sea of barbarism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Jabotinsky, who is sort of the forerunner of like Netanyahu's type of Zionism, though Netanyahu took it much further. But like Begin, who I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of more right wing Zionism was like, yeah, of course we're colonizing the Palestine, and why would the Arabs accept us? I mean, we're taking their land. He was
Mm-hmm.
quite open, right? And so it's funny seeing all these Hasbara accounts being like, did you know that Jews are indigenous to Israel? Like you
But
can't
that's
do
what you're told. I was told
colonialism.
that as a kid as well.
Yeah.
We were driven out of the land. All of our stories are about being driven out of the land as well. And you practice Passover, you practice Purim every year, and you're told this land is owed to you. Right from when you're a very little baby, and you believe
Yeah.
that too because you're itinerant. If you were anything like me, I was a nerd, so I identified with Jewish people inherently, the nerds of history. You know, we're always getting beaten up on there, descending into
Yeah.
jokey joke territory. But
And so I remember in 2000, when I was like 9 years old, almost 10, summer of 2000, I remember like earlier that year, my mom picked me up from school and she was like, guess what? We're going to Israel this summer. It was a celebration of my grandfather's 80th birthday. And I was just so jubilant. I remember that, like thinking that was the coolest thing ever. And,
yeah.
have you ever been to Israel?
I've never been to Israel. I mean, that's my story of how I became skeptical of Israel was the birthright phone call. That basically just turned me right off of it.
Oh, so you almost went to Israel?
I almost went to Israel. I mean, like my story of how I just got like turned off of Israel is really quick. It was one phone call from Birthright where, you know, me and my friend didn't know anything about politics right after college. So we're like, well, we're both Jewish. You know, we'll go on Birthright. It's a fun thing to do after college. You go on vacation, you see an interesting place. You know, there's nothing political about it. Israel's just a country, right? You know, just like any other country, like going to France. Apparently, it's very similar to us. They have row houses, they have technology. Ooh, they have Western style apartment blocks. It sort of looks like weird Miami. And so, you know, you think that's what's going to happen. But the guy on the phone was just, it was like a really aggressive sales pitch, which many other people have talked to me about their experience with like birthright recruiting or just have noted in general that it's like, were you birthright recruited with a very aggressive guy?
No, I actually never went on Birthright
Okay.
because I went to Israel a couple times with my family before that. So I was just like, I know I probably still could have gone on Birthright, but by that time I was sort of realizing that I wasn't too fond of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
Though I do remember, again, the first time I went there, it was really cool seeing like Orthodox Jews like busking on the street and like
Yeah.
selling stuff, having all these signs in Hebrew, which I went to a Jewish day school. I learned Hebrew and I mean, I didn't learn it well. I can't really speak any. I know Hebrew when I hear it and I cross the street, but and it was really like a good experience. I met my Israeli cousins who and I've met them since that we've grown older, and they're good people. I like them, and I'm happy that as of now they're safe. But then, of course, the second Intifada broke out in late 2000. Like a month or two after I was there, because Ariel Sharon, who's like this right-wing extremist Israeli politician who was a former general when Israel invaded Lebanon in the 80s, and he presided over the Sabra Shatila massacre, which we may maybe talk about in a bit, because some of the things...
Yeah, there's been a lot of disinfo referencing that specifically, but saying that Palestinians committed it.
Yeah, without any substantiation.
Yeah.
And he decided to show up. This was right. There was this peace process in the 90s. I don't think we have time to deconstruct it, but as you can see, it didn't pan out. But Sharon went with like 1,000 armed soldiers to the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem to make the showing that we're the ones in charge here. Like, don't forget it. Yeah. And that sort of sparked this tension that had already been building up. Right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like it was completely spontaneous, but that was sort of but it was grassroots, and that was sort of that sort of lit the match. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, I was in Toronto. I just knew what my parents and my relatives told me, that, the Arabs trying to kill us. They're blowing up buses in Tel Aviv. Israel's trying to defend itself, but all these Palestinian terrorists are hiding behind civilians. Yasser Arafat is just like Hitler.
Yeah.
All this
Yeah,
stuff, and then
all the classics,
yeah,
bringing out.
just it's the same talking points you hear today. It's just there's like they're just becoming so inconceivable.
So much more difficult to prove.
Like we've heard this all before. You're and but and I thought nothing of it. Like I thought, they killed Arafat or he died after they like bombed his it was crazy what they did to Arafat. Just like pulling up tanks to his like house and just like bombing. They knew what room he was in and just bombing all the rooms around it. And he wasn't allowed to leave, and then he died. And one thing about, and obviously I didn't know this at the time, but one thing Arafat was very strong at was keeping the Palestinian factions united. Right? There wasn't this split between Hamas and Fatah that sort of Israel and with U.S. support and European support really exploited years later. But there are a few things that really started to change my perspective, and I don't quite remember the order they happened in. But the first one that stands out to me is when Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006. Because by this point, I was like paying attention to politics. I knew I was a progressive. I didn't like Stephen Harper. I didn't like George W. Bush. And, and I remember Israel just bombing the shit out of Lebanon and killing mostly civilians. And George W. Bush, it got to a point where George W. Bush was like, okay, we need to have a ceasefire. And Ehud Olmert, who politics have shifted so far to the right in Israel that Ehud Olmert is like a left winger now. But he was just like, I remember him going on TV and being like, there will never be a ceasefire. We're going to bomb them for peace. Right. And I thought that was weird. Like, how's this guy how's George Bush like the voice of restraint here? And then, of course, again, the same set of talking points that gets repeated every time. Oh, well, Israel's not trying to kill civilians. It's just Hezbollah. That's where they store their rockets. So we have to kill civilians. And it's like, of course, at the time I didn't know the intricacies of guerrilla warfare. And it's like, yeah, no shit. Like, what, like, but of course they're gonna do warfare from like urban areas, right?
So you can just get away with anything by saying, they're not interested in preserving the lives of civilians because they can get away with it.
And then around that time, it was also I went to for 2 years in high school. I went to a Jewish high school in Toronto called CHAT, Canadian Hebrew Academy of Toronto. And then the second 2 years, I was like, okay, I want to like meet people who aren't like Ashkenazi Jews. But in one of our Hebrew classes, they showed us this because again, also part of this indoctrination is, when you go to university, there's going to be so much anti-Semitism and you're going to have to stand up for Israel. Because right, that's scary. And so as part of this, it was actually our teacher was Israeli, and she showed us this actually really good documentary that I'm sure some of your listeners have seen called Discordia. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't seen Discordia. What's that?
So do you remember when Netanyahu tried to speak at Concordia? This was because he was prime minister first in 97, 98, right? And then he got voted out. They voted Ehud Barak in, and then Ariel Sharon, and then Netanyahu came back in like 2009.
But he was still internationally popular because he was sort of this vaguely handsome military strongman, and Israel, they had better PR at the time.
Yeah, and he's like an effective communicator. Like that's how his career started. He was going on because, of course, Netanyahu is from Philadelphia.
He's from King of Prussia, Philly, right?
Yeah. So, but they had him in the 80s just going on as like a Israeli government like media surrogate and just lying on TV about the war in Lebanon, about the Intifada. And there was I remember reading later on Edward Said.
Mm-hmm.
Edward's the great Palestinian American scholar. Edward Said was supposed to debate Netanyahu at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and Netanyahu demanded, he's like, we cannot be in like Netanyahu refused to be in the same studio as him because he said, this man wants to kill me. And like if you read Edward Said, like I mean,
pretty mild guy. He's one of the milder guys, you know.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem very violent or anything like that.
Yeah, and still, Commentary Magazine called him the Professor of Terror.
He's like the most normal man on earth. But you know, that's
oh yeah. And so, but anyways, so Netanyahu tried to speak at Concordia. Some pro-Israel group on campus invited him, and there was like a fucking riot. You know, students protest against it, and it sort of devolved into a riot. And in that documentary, which they showed us in Jewish day school, and they actually, the teacher asked us, like, do we think those, like, are those Palestinian activists anti-Semitic? And there was actually a debate about it in class. Come to think of it, that was kind of that was something I think only an Israeli teacher would have actually facilitated, right? Mm-hmm. Because you know, there are pretty big differences about how Israel is talked about in Israel and how it's talked about in diaspora Jewish communities that are kind of, the distinctions are kind of nuanced, because it's not like, you know, people think that because there are so many Israelis protesting their government and there are so many that blame them for the current crisis that they're against like what the military is doing, and they're not. Right? Like they may blame Netanyahu for letting the Hamas, you know, massacres take place, which I think is probably true. They deliberately allowed it to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't want to say for sure. I don't want to say for certain, but there was a bunch of intelligence ignored.
Yeah, which is convenient. And Netanyahu, I mean, remember on September 11th, Netanyahu was asked by the New York Times, what do you think this means for America's relationship with Israel? And he said, I think it's very good. And then he was like, well, not very good, but I think it will like strengthen our relationship because America knows what we go through. But and good on the New York Times reporter for keeping the very good in there, right? Yeah. Because that, I mean, that tells you everything about who this guy is. I mean, it was also during the Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister who, you know, signed the shoddy peace agreement with Yasser Arafat. That was really,
he was like the one progressive guy, the one pseudo progressive gesture.
Yeah, because he was also during the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising. He was the defense minister, and he was telling soldiers like, you need to beat the shit out of these people. I don't care how old they are. Break their bones, right? Yeah. But he was more pragmatic, right? Yeah. That he wanted to reach some sort of arrangement with the Palestinians where they would accept subjugation.
He wasn't trying to incite Palestinian violence such that he could respond tenfold.
Right. And so because I think that's a very important distinction between the sort of liberal and like conservative and fascist Israelis, is that the liberals they're more pragmatic, but it's still the same project, right? Mm-hmm. But anyways, they showed us this documentary on Netanyahu's attempt to speak at Concordia in the riots, and they had interviews with Chomsky in it, and I was hearing Chomsky speak, and I was like, this guy's making a lot of sense. Like, why is it like, how is it anti-Semitic? Like, you have a state with policies, and how is it anti-Semitic to say you don't think those policies are humane, right? And also a really young Aaron Mate was in it, because he was like a campus activist at Concordia really? When it was built. Yeah, it's really funny actually, because I think there's a scene where, because Mate's his his upbringing very different from ours. I mean, his dad is, Gabor Mate, who's always been a very strong voice in support of Palestinian human rights. And he's also a Holocaust survivor, which is, he was part of, and I remember, I think Mate was arguing with his Palestinian friends in the Palestine Solidarity Group, being like, well, why don't we just let him speak? Like, who cares? Like, why are we, and anyways.
Yeah, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Was he trying to make one of those arguments?
Yeah, I think so. Which, yeah, that was my, and because also around that time too, that was also my view on, like, I was a free speech absolutist when I was a teenager, because I didn't, I mean, before the internet, that position I think was a lot more defendable.
Because of South Park. I was a free speech absolutist because of freaking South Park. That's why I took on that role. But no, I think it seems like a tenable position, because you learn about. I mean, what sort of got me weirded out about free speech absolutism was just learning the history behind Skokie v. Illinois. It's something that is very much anti-Semitic. And very much seemed like a threat to me immediately, is these fucking Nazis in my backyard, right in the Midwest, and they're being allowed to speak. The ACLU's fighting for them. What the fuck? I was like, I'm all for this shit, but, come on. This one is, that's sort of what turned me off on it.
But sorry, go ahead.
No, I was, so it's the Discordia and, events around the time, the bombing of Yasser Arafat, that made you reconsider stuff as like a teenager, or?
Yeah, I mean, the Arafats, it was after that, because I was just like, oh, this guy's like Hitler. He's a terrorist. He's Osama bin Laden. We have, and it was later that I sort of reevaluated that position. But then I was like, yeah, this Chomsky guy, like, he seems to, like, I'm interested in what he has to say. Like, it never occurred to me that a Jewish person could have a different sort of understanding in relationship to the state of Israel than just
you
total,
literally think every Jewish
like diaspora boy, right? Like that's why Eli Valley's the comics are so good. He just nails it. He nails what it's like to grow up in that environment, in the like sheer insanity of like what we're expected to believe. But yeah, and so I started reading Chomsky, and that really changed my perception. And then, Norman Finkelstein too, who wrote some really good books, really meticulously documented books. And I mean, has always been a loose cannon. And
he's got really when he's in his lane, when he's in the Israel lane, he's good. Don't. It's fine. We don't have to disavow Norm Finkelstein.
Because like
he's really good on Israel. In fact, everyone shares that one piece of footage of him.
The crocodile tears.
Taking it to the another Canadian university, the University of Western Ontario.
Oh that was at Western.
Yeah, that was at Western. And what's funny
where. Well, actually, sorry, you go ahead.
Well, the crocodile tears girl wasn't even Jewish. She was German.
No, she wasn't. And that's the thing. And that's why you can't sympathize with anyone like that, because it's like you're offended that he's comparing Israel to the Nazis because you're German and you don't think your country should be compared to Israel. Like, I mean, that's like so absurd. And that's why people like assume that it's some, like Jewish girl who thinks that like the Holocaust, like Kristallnacht, is going to happen tomorrow unless BDS is declared a hate crime, right? And I pick arguments with my dad, and I was like a teenager, right? So I didn't know as much as I thought I knew, and I wasn't like respectful. And now I've sort of come to an understanding with my dad that what his position on this, which we're never going to agree on, but it's based on like a deep-seated trauma in like. And so I understand that, and I'm like more compassionate towards it now. But anyways, went to university, went to York University, which is supposed to be the most anti-Semitic place on earth, right? Because like students against Israeli apartheid there were like had like big rallies and stuff. And I was like, and people I knew would like go up to, they had like a sort of like mock like apartheid wall that when they were tabling and stuff, and it was very noticeable, and people I knew would go up to them and be like, do you support suicide bombing? Do you think Israel's right to exist? Why? And just like totally narrow-minded and shit. And I would like I was actually quite interested in what their perspective was on it, because I was starting to get this critical perspective on what I was told. And I mean, I made some good friends. My friend Hammam Farah, who's a Palestinian Canadian psychotherapist in Toronto, who has actually been doing a couple media hits and just absolutely crushing it, just talking about because he's originally from Gaza too, and he's Christian. So he's not that it matters, but he's not so fond of Hamas himself. But just talking about like what it's like psychologically for like children to live in Gaza, where like think about it, like Gaza's been under siege for 16 years. So there are a lot of, because half of Gaza is under 18. So there are a lot of people, a lot of kids in Gaza who don't know, and they've never left. Left. And that is, I mean, how, in the way that impacts them psychologically, I think is very important. So anyways, that is like a sort of the short long version of my sort of the how I became anti-Zionist, but yours was just the birthright phone call.
Well, no, it's not just it was interesting for me because I had more liberal Jewish authorities in my life, but they still had, because they were, from the second generation of like people after 1948 or after the Holocaust, they still had that very strong memory of that happening and being like, no, we need security at any cost. We need to, it doesn't matter anymore. We've been kicked around for 5,000 years. This ends today, that sort of mentality. But they still like went to like liberal colleges in the 70s and stuff, and picked in the 80s and picked stuff up where it was like, well, there are some crimes they do. And I was like, well, isn't that bad? And then they would respond with, you don't understand, you've never been, which is a very classic line. I love that line when they use it on you. It's like, but I know they're doing the crimes, right? I know they're doing the very bad things.
I mean, a lot of people haven't been in North Korea, and they have some opinions on North Korea. So, I mean, you just take, in a lot of these Zionist talking points, you just take that argument and you put it on any other like world issue, and it becomes so laughably absurd, right? Like, oh, why Robin Urbach, who I guess a lot of your listeners are American, don't know, she's this right-wing columnist at the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's less right-wing national paper, but
it's sort of like our Wall Street Journal, I guess, is comparable, but not really.
I'd say it's more like the Washington Post. It's hard to because I would say the National Post and Financial Post would be like the Wall Street Journal. Like they're reporting, they do a lot of good reporting sometimes. It's just the Canadian media is weird too, because it's a lot more concentrated and like there's
very
less of it. It's but she was literally, I mean, she was tweeting about decapitated babies, and then when people pointed out to her, like, that's like, you're literally spreading disinformation that hasn't been proved, she just pivoted to being like, well, that doesn't even matter. What you're saying, it's okay to kill babies if you don't chop their heads off? Like,
or did she do the thing where it's like, oh, so you're demanding to see the pictures, you depraved idiot? You picture it didn't happen. What are you? You don't take the word of some random Israeli soldier?
Like, oh, you're saying the Jews are lying about being like, because that the decapitated baby stuff and the rapes, I mean, this is blood libel. This is
Yeah.
literally using the accusation that people are guilty of these like inhuman
Yeah.
acts to justify killing them. But
Yeah.
the way she flips it around, it's like, actually, you're doing a blood libel because you're saying the Jews are lying.
Yeah.
And it's just this lazy conflation of Jews with the state of Israel that all these pro-Israel groups get super mad about. They get their knickers up in a knot when other people do it, but they do it themselves all the time. But she made one point in this Twitter thread that was like, it's only with Israel that people demand to talk about the context of these horrible crimes you see committed by Hamas. You never hear people talking about the context behind Ukraine or Syria. And it's just like, are you actually that dense?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no one, what, Ukraine? Never heard of it. Never heard of it. No one's like critical of US. And it just shows that these right-wing pundits just live in a bubble of people who think like them and are constantly telling each other that they're brilliant and that they have good analysis. And the redeeming quality of Twitter, even with all it's been through now, is the ability to tell these people what people outside of their bubble actually think of them and have them see it and get mad about it. And that's something I don't think when Twitter goes down will ever happen again.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so irritating about pointing out disinformation too, is the utilization of Jewish pain and horrible Jewish stereotypes in order to turn it around and then do something terrible or use it to justify something terrible, I find is deeply irresponsible. Because it's like crying wolf, right? How much longer can any of us get away with it, right? If you diminish the value of what we say we've been through, then it sort of cheapens the idea that we're under any sort of threat or existential threat at all. So it's just like the most classic anti-Semitic trope, right? Is Jews control the media, right? And so they can, anytime you say, hey, you manipulated the media, they can be like, oh, but so you are doing that. But it's like, no, that's bad faith rendering of that because you actually did manipulate the media.
Yeah. And that was another thing that really made me reconsider my support of Israel was when I went to Jewish day school, these honest reporting people were like handing out flyers at my high school. And so I like, there's honest reporting in Canada. I think there's also honest reporting in the States, and there's camera like campaign for accuracy in Middle East. They're like a pro-Israel media watchdog, and they were just saying they were handing out these. And I think it was when I had already started reading Chomsky and stuff, and was like, a huge part of Chomsky's like output has been criticizing how issues like these are covered in the media, and how really in that media only starts paying attention when Israelis are killed, right? It doesn't matter that 250 Palestinians in the West Bank were shot this year until September, and every other invasion of Gaza since 2008, it's always been there's a ceasefire. Israel just decides to bomb Gaza. Yeah, kill some Hamas fighters. Hamas fires rockets into Israel, and then they're like, they're firing rockets at us. We've got to destroy the place. Yeah, and that's what makes this time a bit different, but it's still the same dynamics, right? Yeah. But so their whole thing is that there's this media bias against Israel, and we need to combat it. Which is like insane. Yeah, no, like, obviously the media is very much pro-Israel. We like Israel in this country. They're supporters. They're the bastion of civilization in the Middle East. Most people in this country believe that. In Canada and in America, I would venture to say that most people believe the basic statement that, oh, we love Israel, we're allies. On Edmonton, on the Edmonton Stadium in your neck of the woods, they had the "We Stand with Israel" board. I don't understand. Right, and like yesterday,
Yeah.
yesterday when Israel is literally ethnically cleansing Gaza. It's
Mhm.
we stand with Israel, and all these people who were saying a few days ago, oh, why did you criticize Israel now? They're still in mourning. It's like, well, when's the right time? When's the
Yeah.
right time? When half the people in Gaza are expelled or die?
Yeah.
Is that okay or no? Because they're going to have some other excuse because there's going to be more violence in Israel, I suspect. But
Yeah.
I
I mean, it's
remember
also,
asking the. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, it's just also easy to criticize because it's like, oh, well, uh, yeah, Hamas did the attacks, but who empowered Hamas to begin with? There is like a direct violence, but then there is, who's at the top? Who is actually directing this violence or giving it a
Right.
funnel?
And just the daily brutalities. This is every day. Not only are Palestinians regularly killed with scant, not that it doesn't get covered in the media, but it's scant and it's forgotten about until um, Palestinians do something in retaliation, and that doesn't. And I'm really tired of having to add this caveat, but with the political climate as it is, noting that just because you're saying something is retaliation doesn't mean it's justified,
Yeah.
which, the Israelis don't like hearing either, because then it's
Mm.
like, wait, so you're saying what we're doing is wrong too? Sounds pretty anti-Semitic to me. But,
Yeah.
but anyways, yeah, this honest reporting, right? It's just some student who was
Yeah.
doing some internship or something. And I was like, okay, you want to fight media bias against Israel, but it seems that like what you're advocating for is actually media bias towards Israel, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they just nitpick, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're like in media and saying something pro-Palestinian and you make some minor error, they will pounce on it and be like,
Yeah.
see, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Why are they lying? Why are they lying? Why are they lying about the world's only Jewish state?
Yeah.
And then and sometimes they do catch like again minor factual errors that do warrant
Yeah.
but often like their fact checking will just be their opinion and just
Yeah.
being like this opinion is not fit for publishing,
Yeah.
it's wrong. They have a list, they have like a glossary of like problematic terminology, and I mean your listeners can't see but I'm doing air
Mm-hmm.
quotes, and one of them is West Bank, which they think should be called Judea and Samaria, which is what the fanatical Orthodox Jewish settlers who colonized the West Bank refer to it as, which I mean tells you what their sort
Yeah.
of agenda is. But anyways, this student, I asked her that, and she was like, "Well, we just no, we ensure that Israel is treated fairly in the media." But I'm like, well, okay, but like, what is fair? Like, isn't like I don't know. It seems what you're advocating is that perspectives that are different than the Israeli governments get taken out, that need to be like cracked down on in the media. And she was just said the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like a robot, like, oh, we just no, we want to ensure Israel's treated fairly in media.
Yeah.
And I found that
It's that
extremely
sales
false.
pitch thing, the sales pitch thing again, where it's just you stick to the line, you do your diligence, and you sell something. Which
Yeah.
is that's what turned me off of it, which is just that, man, you seem really trying to convince me in a very shallow way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just because I've been talking to friends of mine, Jewish friends who, I've known for a while, who, I always suspected were like probably like, because when someone is like a Zionist because they don't shut the fuck up about it.
Yeah, it's like, yeah,
you,
they love that country.
but yeah, friends of mine who are like, wow, I'm like this what's happening now has really woken me up, and I'm looking into it, and it's crazy, like all these things that we weren't told about, and that we were just taught to assume that Palestinians hate us because we're Jewish and not because we kick them out of their
Yeah,
homes to
we did
create
the Nakba. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, a Jewish state, which has been really heartening to see. But I was talking to one friend of mine, a good friend, he's not very political, right, at all. Like, I don't think he votes. Um, Maybe he's voted a couple times, but like he's not like he doesn't pay. But he's a very like emotionally intelligent guy, I would say. And like I was talking to him, and it's like he was like, yeah, I don't really, like, I've never known much about this issue, but it's always like, I've always, something's felt off about it, about how the way people like talk about Israel. And I was like, it really does come down to vibes, like having your heart in the right place, knowing something's off, and then, you do your homework going through that. And you just, right? Not that you just read another perspective and then it's like, oh, this actually makes a lot more sense than what I've been told. This is like, and it's a lot more compassionate and humane. And because I mean, I think Israeli Jews are there to stay, and I don't think anyone serious is saying they all need to leave, like the French in Algeria, but it's just there needs to be some sort of configuration, whether it's a binational state or some sort of confederation, or I don't know, like a series of independent fiefdoms, like whatever, where Jews and Palestinians have the same rights.
Yes. Yeah. That's
period. And that means Israel shouldn't be a Jewish state. Fucking cope.
Yeah.
It shouldn't. And I mean, you could say, oh, well, do you think Saudi Arabia should be an Islamic state? And I would say, well, Saudi Arabia doesn't go around committing atrocities in my name, but in my irrelevant opinion, I don't think Saudi Arabia should be a theocratic monarchy. Right. And that's always the thing where they're trying to say these double standards against Israel. And they're not double standards at all. It's just they don't want you talking about Israel, period. So unless you criticize every other country in the world in the same breath that you criticize Israel, then you might be doing anti-Semitism. Right. And with the IRA definition of anti-Semitism that all these pro-Israel groups, who, at least in Canada, completely mask themselves as Jewish advocacy groups like B'nai B'rith and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs and the local Jewish federations, which I'm told is actually quite different in the States, where like Jewish federations just focus on like local Jewish community stuff, and then like AIPAC does their thing. And obviously there's overlap, but it's not like in Canada, the Jewish federations fund the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, which is essentially our AIPAC. Mm-hmm. So there's that institutional linkage between them that fuels this conflation of Jews in Israel. And then they get mad when people on the other side do it. And
that's always the case.
But yeah, this IRA definition of anti-Semitism, I don't like. Have you read it, Alex? Like
what is the IRA definition of anti-Semitism?
Well, basically, it's a bunch of gobbledygook. Like it's not. But basically, it was developed as this sort of academic exercise.
What is it? Being mean to any Jew is anti-Semitism?
Not quite, but here's what, and tell me if this clarifies anything.
Okay.
Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities.
Okay.
Like it's just pablum, right? But this wasn't
meant. Be hate towards Gentiles can also be anti-Semitism.
I guess exactly, and it's so vague.
If you I guess paint a swastika on an Italian guy's house, I guess that would be anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I guess but like that is like relatively innocuous. Like it's vague, but it's like okay, whatever. But then it basically outlines these examples of what constitutes anti-Semitism.
What constitutes anti-Semitism, Jeremy? what do they define?
Okay, well there are a bunch. Okay. There are 11 examples. 6 of them are in relation to the state of Israel.
Okay. Okay. That seems very specific.
Right, exactly. And so some of them are like calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. That's kind of a weird framing. Like,
But
that's
sure,
clearly,
you know, yeah.
yeah, like whatever. Like, I'll give them that. Um, Making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as collective, such as, especially but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy, or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other social societal institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair enough, but that's like,
Yeah.
it's
But
also,
that gets to the root of saying you can't criticize Hasbara because you're saying Jews control the media.
right. You can't criticize the Israel lobby, right?
Yeah.
Like they would, like John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt's book, right?
Yeah.
About
That's
the
very
Israel.
reasonable on its face, but it's going to be utilized in bad faith.
Exactly. And you have to remember that the group's pushing for every government to adopt the IRA definition, which it says on its website, it's non-binding. It's non-binding,
Sure.
but the groups pushing for it while emphasizing it's non-binding are also like, we need governments to endorse this. We need schools. We need law enforcement. We need like every sector of society to endorse this particular vague definition of anti-Semitism. But let me go on here. We'll get to, there's Holocaust denial, obviously anti-Semitic.
Sure. Yeah.
Now here's where accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. I mean, I guess that's fair, but it's also like,
I don't know. That doesn't. Do people accuse Jews of that? That seems like an old thing that people used to
like
do in the
dual
60s,
loyalty.
but nobody does that anymore because, like,
yeah, and again, it's weaponized, being like, oh, you talk about how, like Ilhan Omar, right, when she was saying that these like AIPAC is forcing American politicians to pledge loyalty to a foreign state, like that's not anti-Semitic, but under this definition, I mean, it could be interpreted that way. Now, here's one: denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. Example: by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor.
So very specific.
Yeah, like creating a Jewish ethno-state is racist. Fuck you. Like I'm gonna. Right.
Cordoning us off into a piece of land in the global south. You know, Hitler didn't want to do that at all. You know, that wasn't the original plan. You know,
no, the early Zionists, the Leahy, the Stern gang didn't want nothing to do with Nazism. They weren't trying to reach an agreement with Hitler.
Right.
Google that. Trust me. Google it. Google Stern Gang Nazism to find out more about how they didn't want to collaborate with Nazis.
Right. They didn't want to do that.
No, they did not. It's actually anti-Semitic to say they did.
It's very anti-Semitic, according to IRA.
Yeah. Here's a good one. Applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation.
So it's like America kills millions of people in Iraq, so we get to do it too.
Yeah, like what does that mean? Like that is so vague. It makes no fucking sense.
China does, China, they get to do their thing. We can't do our thing.
Yeah. Okay, here's one. Using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, example of Jews killing Jesus or blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, sure. I'll give that to you. Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis.
Well, hold on, because
I mean, look, I mean, I've increasingly come around to the position that comparing Israel to the Nazis is not just like acceptable, but like a moral necessity. I think because of my upbringing, there's some sensitivity around there, and I was like, I don't know if it's helpful, but honestly, the people you're alienating with that aren't gonna listen to you anyways. So if you want to, I mean, it's hard not. It's increasingly hard not to.
it's
compare Israel to the
difficult
Nazis.
because in terms of like what Nazi Germany was, like a state gone mad, like where 80% of the populace believed in this sort of death urge, everybody's a hero thing, like if you read in like Umberto Eco's fascism, the characteristics that he describes very much describe Israel, especially having a culture based around primarily the military. America is like a military culture, but plenty of people, most people I would reckon are still, there's a bigger variety of people than in Israel, where everyone is very military oriented and has that sort of them or us mentality that defines fascism, where it's we need an out group in order to define ourselves as a nation, and we need to do terrible things to this out group. And once that out group is eradicated, we'll find another out group.
Yeah, and I mean, like think about like my response to that is that these pro-Israel propagandists are constantly comparing the Palestinians to Nazis. So if they can compare Palestinians to Nazis, I think it's completely sensible to be like, turn the tables and be like, well, I don't know who just expelled 1 million people from their homes.
Yeah. But
who's trying to get other countries to take them in because they don't want them. And what happens after that?
But they operate on the childlike logic that Jews can't be Nazis. Jews are the opposite of Nazis. Yeah. Didn't you learn anything? They're the enemies of Nazis, right? They can't do anything similar to them. Why would they, right?
Yeah. And I mean, exactly. It is this really like infantile logic that because Jews were victimized by Nazis in the past, they can't ever be perpetrators. And that to me is
deeply anti-Semitic, like deeply coddling and anti-Semitic, because you're also associating me with these fucking Nazis. I don't want to be associated
which actually brings me to the final example in the IRA definition of anti-Semitism: holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of State of Israel. I agree that I agree that's anti-Semitic, but the biggest propagators of that are pro-Israel organizations. Mm-hmm. And purveyors of that, the very people.
Right. It's good. You need to do it. You need to go to birth. Yeah. That's what the guy was saying. You have to. You are a Jew. Israel is a part of you. You must. There's no escaping it. You are eternally drawn there, like some big magnet.
But also the IRA definition in its preamble, I forgot to mention this. It says criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. So if I say Israel's committing genocide against Palestinians, like Canada committed genocide against indigenous peoples, I don't think the people ramming the IRA definition down the throats of governments are going to say that's not anti-Semitic, because again, they would say, they would find one of these other examples and be like, oh yeah, but you're comparing Israel to the Nazis, right? Yeah. It's like, well, actually, I'm comparing Canada to the Nazis. But
there were Nazis in Canada, right? So you're comparing Israel to the Nazis, I mean, even though I guess that was pre-Nazi, but the problem with these vague definitions is any one of them can be twisted around, or the one that you could use is like saying the stereotypes of Jews one. Oh, it's like, oh, you're saying we're colonial settlers, that's blood libel. You're saying that's blood libel again,
Yeah, it's like literally any argument we can't rebut is a blood libel.
And it works because in the popular memory, I mean, that's the thing that I've observed about liberals that especially hold on to Israel, is the image of Israel in a lot of people's minds is of the progress of liberalism, of the progress of democracy, because it's like, well, we used to hate the Jews and now they got their own country because of us. Isn't that good? Right? We did a good thing. That proves that we're, moving stuff along, right? So if it turns out what they did, the aiding of this country, this ethno state, into sort of this perversion of Judaism, if that suddenly they can't accept that, because then their worldview crumbles. The idea that we live in sort of a flawed but ultimately progressive and just society that's arcing towards some sort of history, because neoliberal democracy is good, right? And so if you say that Israel is bad, or the support of Israel is in fact anti-Semitic, then they can't accept that, because their whole worldview shatters. It's like a big component of their idea of progress is, we treat the Jews good now. How do we know Israel, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that also a sort of contradiction of Zionism that really made me question it, was this fact that we were constantly told that Israel is a democracy, just like Canada, just like America or Australia, or the UK.
Yeah, they always say, hey, they voted for Hamas, so just like Gaza, just like
But then it's like, okay, but what about the dark side of these democratic countries that we live in that we're told Israel is exactly like, right? Mm-hmm. What about killing of indigenous people? What about the British Empire, right? And what about slavery? What about Jim Crow, right? But you're not like that, right? It's only the good stuff. The bad stuff, talk about that, you're anti-Semitic. But I just wanted to pull something up. Here's a little op-ed in The Guardian in 2019.
Yeah.
By Kenneth Stern.
Who's Kenneth Stern?
Well, here's the headline. I drafted the definition of anti-Semitism. Right-wing Jews are weaponizing it.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
He's the guy who wrote this stuff.
Who
because it wasn't, again, it's like he says in the piece, which is very very good piece. And I mean, this guy's not anti-Zionist. He's like a liberal Zionist. Mm-hmm. But he's saying that the definition's imperfect, right? Like it wasn't meant to be adopted as like public policy and to guide legislation. It was meant as like an academic exercise, right? But it's being weaponized by these pro-Israel organizations. And a friend of mine who's anti-Zionist, who's quite involved in the Jewish community in Calgary, asked the Jewish Federation when they were trying to get Calgary City Council to endorse IRA, and Calgary City Council didn't. He asked them, well, what do you have to say about the fact that the person who wrote it said it's being weaponized and it's not intended to be used that way? And the Jewish Federation guy was just like, oh, but it's the gold standard. It's the gold standard. That's their talking point. And it's like, there are other definitions. First of all, why do we need to define anti-Semitism? And why is it the job of governments to define words?
Yeah. Seems like that's a thing for like a human rights tribunal or something like that. It seems like that would be more of a relevant,
like, is there a
legal field?
Like, is there a definition of anti-Black racism that like governments have adopted so they can know what anti-Black racism is, or do they just use their fucking head? Well, often they don't, but I mean, not just, I think,
But yeah, so I mean, even the fact that we need to define it begin with speaks to just the nebulous quality of the phrase anti-Semitism to begin with.
Yeah. And anyways, I mean, it's just such a like bad faith exercise, and it's not even about what the definition says. It's the groups who are advocating it want to use it because it allows them to be the ultimate arbiters of how it's interpreted. Right. And that's why it's dangerous. It's not even about what's in it. It's the sort of forces that are coalescing around it, these dark forces who are openly, applauding ethnic cleansing now. And I don't know if you maybe want to pivot to like more current stuff.
Yeah, I think, we've been talking about our just the basic. I want to establish it's important for Jews to speak up about this too, because all of the time our identities are being weaponized in order to carry out something terrible. They're saying this is for you, right? And that's just disgusting to my very core. I hate it so much. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm talking about this because it is, of the mode or the trend. This is like, I don't talk about politics very often. This is the one issue that I feel very invested in because they are investing me in it. They're pulling me into it because I'm Jewish and I share some part of this heritage. The guys at Young and Bathurst, when I'm on the bus at Young and Bathurst, ask me to do tefillin with them because they know. That's happened to me a couple of times. Has an Orthodox Jewish fella ever asked you to do tefillin with them?
Yes, but I just wanted to point out, Young and Bathurst is not an intersection in Toronto.
You're right. It's Lawrence and
Bathurst, of course. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They used to when I moved on to public school. I went to public school in a very Jewish neighborhood where I lived, and they would be like they're Chabadniks, I think, right? They're part of the Chabad movement, which is a particular sect of ultra-Orthodox Judaism that is Zionist, and they're very evangelical, but in a way that it's only within the Jewish community. Like they're trying to convert and save Jews who follow a different type of denomination or are secular, not religious, that they want to convert them. They don't care about non-Jews.
Yeah.
Interesting. But they would fucking wait outside our public school and then just go around being like, excuse me, are you Jewish?
Yeah.
And then you would say, yeah. And they would be like, have you put on tefillin today? And tefillin, how do you describe tefillin to like a non-Jewish person? I was trying to explain it to my partner.
They wrap a cloth around your arm. It's like if you were...
Well, it's not a cloth though, it's leather.
Yeah. It's an arm wrapping ceremony.
Well, but also there's a box.
Yeah.
And like the box goes on your bicep. And this is like, anyways, Google tefillin.
It's a ritual you do to bring you closer to God or whatever. It's one of
exactly. And then these guys are like, and if you make the mistake of saying yes, they're like, oh, have you put on tefillin today? And it's like, no, of course not. I
have other things to do. I don't need to put on tefillin today.
And they're like, oh, you should try it. It's like the most amazing feeling ever. Like, they just try and sell you so hard on it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. Or they'll be like, no, I got a bus to catch. And they're like, it will only take 3 minutes. And it's like, no, my bus is here in like 2 minutes. And he's like, don't worry, 1 minute. Like they just really want
it real quick.
It's like it, right? They're saving your soul. Yeah. Right. And so Chabad, and I believe it's the fastest growing denomination of Judaism because they recruit aggressively, which other Jewish denominations don't. It's interesting because, like, of course, the bulk of ultra Orthodox Jews are anti-Zionist, but they're part of the Satmar movement, the Satmar Hasidic movement that is totally insular. Yeah. Right. They're almost like the opposite of Chabad, whereby, like, I don't even think I've met a Satmar person in my life. And I lived in like the Jewish community in like the Jewish city in Canada. And
one time I drove through Kiryas Joel because me and my friends were just interested to see what Kiryas Joel was like when I was living in New York. And I saw Satmar people. I didn't talk to them.
Yeah, but a lot of them don't speak English. They speak Yiddish.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like quaint and like charming. And,
I love Yiddish. I like, if in terms of what I want to learn, I would rather learn Yiddish than Hebrew, in my opinion. It's a funner. All of the Jewish words that everyone knows in the West are Yiddish words, like fakakta or
schmuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
But because your mom is Jewish.
My mom is Jewish. Yeah.
Right. And so did her parents, like, where were her parents from?
Her parents, her mom was from England, and her mom was in the Blitz. So she had sort of like very pro-Israel because she directly faced Hitler. And, there was her dad was Canadian.
Was she a fan of the Beatles?
She was a fan of the Beatles at the time. I actually went through her old 8-track collection one time and I found Deep Purple tape. And I was like, yeah, right on, Mom. Right on, Mom. You had Machine Head. That's cool.
Yeah. My mom's record collection is pretty cool too. She has like some Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and like Carole King, and a lot of good shit. But
Yeah.
so I guess it's different back because so my parents, both my parents are Jewish, and their parents all um either came from Europe or their parents came from Europe.
Yeah.
So they spoke Yiddish, but they like my parents didn't learn Yiddish. Like their parents spoke Yiddish when they didn't want my parents to know what they were saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it didn't get passed on, right? It's a dead language. I mean, I learned Hebrew. My dad learned Hebrew too. And again, I barely know any. But because the way language is, like the way the language was taught to us in Jewish day school, it was also like I just didn't care. It's like, what do I need to know Hebrew from? I live in Canada, right? And I think that's something that why a guy like Richard Spencer, that I'm a white Zionist, right? I want to create a white homeland, and Jews can go to their homeland. And that's why I think the idea of Zionism for Jewish people, for increasing amounts of Jewish people, is so repugnant, not just because of the brutality it metes out against the Palestinians daily.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is the most important part. But also, I think from our perspective, it expects us to identify with a foreign country we've never lived in.
Yeah.
Right. And to support it.
And your experience as a Jew is worth less if you're not in this foreign country.
Yeah, exactly. It's like diaspora boy in Israel, man.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I think because before the Holocaust, that was the vast majority of Jews, right? That's what they thought, that that Zionism is anti-Semitic. Why do you want us to leave? Like we're German, or we're British, or we're American. Why do we want to go to some, and I think a lot of them had like assumptions about that part of the world that were problematic, of it being like this backwater, but certainly the Zionists had those assumptions too and put them into practice. I don't know. It's like, because, to take it back to, the current state of
let's
affairs.
Take it back to what's going on right now.
It seemed to me that right after the Hamas, I mean, these were massacres, right? Yeah. And we can talk about the propaganda that's trying to like make it not just that these were horrible, evil acts, which they were, but that this was like these people are subhumans, that they're beheading babies, they're just raping people.
They're taking a horrible thing that is provable that they definitely did, then they're exaggerating it to make them seem like even more inhuman monsters, which is,
to make it urgent, right?
I mean, there is a seed of truth. Yes, they murdered people, but then they say also they did these other terrible things that make it seem much, like when we think about soldier deaths or like war deaths, it's always amplified by the fact that there's like a sexual or a depraved child murder element to it. There's something added on to it that makes your enemy seem much more monstrous than just killing alone.
Yeah, exactly. But basically, I obviously after that, I mean, I felt like I was on fucking Mars, like just the amount of goodwill that Israel had, and people were people weren't talking about the context, right? They were just like, I stand with Israel. All the fucking politicians.
Well, isn't Sheikh Jarrah is in such recent memory, right? And like that was one of the few like popular groundswells I ever saw for Palestine, right? Because there was no violent reproach from any Palestinian, or like very little violent reproach from any Palestinian in that conflict. It was exclusively Israel just doing crazy stuff, and everyone.
It was violent settlers from fucking Brooklyn who
Yaakov from Brooklyn,
who claim they're indigenous to the Middle East. And I think Mohammed Al-Kurd, sort of emerged as this really powerful young voice speaking out against that. He's really fantastic. I mean, his poetry is great. and his journalism as well. And he's a good poster.
He's a good poster, the best one of all, the most important one of all.
Speaking of which, it was great seeing Drill come out in support of Palestine.
Good old Drill, you know, he made.
And that, I think that was when the tide started turning, because once you lost Drill,
once you've lost the Drill vote, and
yeah,
I wasn't reading Drill. It's so funny imagining the idea of like Hasbara people arguing with Drill in his comments.
There was in the replies, and like all those like Hindutva people.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah. But yeah, that goodwill evaporated so fast now, right? Like, I think, you know, the people that are going to stand by Israel no matter what they do are still going to do that, and they're going to fucking exploit the grief of these Israeli families who still don't know what happened to their loved ones or lost loved ones. But I think most people, I think the narrative has quickly gone back to what was in 2021, where it's like, you can't force these people into a cage or in the West Bank, make them go through checkpoints, make them drive on separate roads, build settlements, burn their olive orchards, kill them, arrest them. I mean, people keep saying, "Oh, Hamas needs to release the hostages." What they have like 150 Israelis, and they should release them. But Israel has thousands of Palestinians in their prisons.
Yeah, I mean,
1,100
numbers, the asymmetry of the numbers. Yeah,
and 1,100 without charges. As far as I'm concerned, those are hostages as well, and so they need to trade. And that is why, from a military stand, again, we don't know all the facts about this, Hamas, these Hamas massacres and kidnappings, right? And there's just this sea of disinformation that's really hard, right? This like house of mirrors. But like militarily, the idea of breaking out of Gaza, taking hostages, showing that you're a force to be reckoned with. I mean, it does have military logic, and you take away the morals of it. Like it's just like, now we're closer to being on equal footing. We have leverage over you. If you want this to stop, you have to take our demands seriously. But then you realize everyone knew what was going to happen next, right?
Yeah, they knew what was, because you don't do that without knowing that, okay, Israel always retaliates 25-fold, right? So,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, this government, as anyone who pays attention to this issue knows, has members who are openly exterminationist, right? And I mean, again, Zionism is always like Canada in the United States. I mean, that's a difference. People talk about how comparing Israel to apartheid South Africa isn't accurate. And in most ways, I think it is.
Yeah.
But one way in which it's not accurate, in which Israel's worse, is that they don't just want to subjugate and exploit the Palestinians like the white South Africa did for black South Africans. They want to eliminate them.
Yeah.
Right.
I think people don't understand just how much just a casual genocidal attitude is accepted amongst a disturbingly large amount of the population. And it's just like they'll be normal about other things. They'll be normal about like, oh yeah, I like gay marriage, and then it's like, well, what about the Arabs? Gotta go. You know, it's like it's a very strange dissonance sometimes.
Yeah, and it's weird. Yeah, and it's kind of like it's interesting the way that Israeli Jews talk about Israel and Palestine, and the way diaspora Jews talk about it. And I've been, I alluded to this earlier, but the diaspora, at least of our parents' generation, and some people in our generation, it's like, oh no, Israel's not doing any of these things, that Israel's this liberal democracy that does no wrong.
Yeah.
But Israelis,
Yeah.
And again, not there are different factions, and
yeah, there's not
but
changing everyone, but a large portion, a significant portion.
yeah, are like, yeah, of course we did this shit and we need to do it again.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing
board,
now.
yeah.
Right. I mean, one of the ministers, I believe it was Smotrich, the finance minister, who's a proud homophobe. He's calling himself a proud homophobe. And maybe we could talk a bit about the sort of pink washing.
I hate that, because I'll do another. No. I got another identity category. I'm gay as well. And it's doubly sick when they say, Hamas hates gays. They hate gays. But then Israel bombs them and they hit the gay Palestinians as well. They also kill the gay Palestinians.
Yeah.
They're not doing them favors.
Yeah. And it's like, okay. And they talk about how, gay Palestinians escaped to Israel to live in Tel Aviv. And it's like, okay, what tell us more about that. Like, what did the Israeli military make them do before allowing them permits? Because again, if you're a Palestinian, you need permission from Israel to travel anywhere, right? Not just outside to go on a trip to Europe or something, but to go into Israel. I mean, if you're a refugee, to go to where your family was expelled from, you need a permit from Israel, whereas Jews are free to go anywhere except for like the parts of the West Bank where Palestinians live in Gaza, which is not a Palestinian imposition. It's the Israeli government that is keeping them separated because it is apartheid, though not completely identical to the apartheid practice in South Africa, but
still one where a racialized group is kept under the thumb of another racialized group.
Yeah. And where was I going with that?
It was the gay Palestinians do not have freedom,
right? And I mean, gay Palestinians, get blackmailed by the Israeli military for intelligence, right? Like, if you don't tell us this information you might have about Hamas, your parents may find out that you're gay.
Yeah.
Just really psychopathic shit.
Yeah. Also, it's not like Israel is so much more progressive than Gaza either. Is gay marriage legal in Israel?
No, it's not. In fact, secular marriage is not, right? You have to have an Orthodox Jewish wedding in Israel. Palestinian citizens, I think, need to have like an Islamic wedding too. Right. And like it's right, because there are sort of different configurations of Palestinian subjugation based on where they live in Israel, because it's all Israel, right? This distinction between Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, it's totally artificial because Israel controls it all in different configurations. So Palestinian citizens of Israel nominally have rights. They can vote, right? But there are many restrictions on them that don't apply to Israeli Jews.
Yeah.
Like in terms of also like not just on individual level, but like on like municipal level in terms of like city planning and stuff.
Yeah.
Like like Arab cities like Nazareth, which I believe is the biggest one in Israel, but Jerusalem as well. But that's increasingly being Judaized, like what happened in Sheikh Jarrah by these settlers from America and elsewhere who are just coming and being like, my family owned this.
I have the deed from 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. So pay me rent or you have to leave. Yeah. And they can't like expand. Right, they can't grow. Right, and so there are like over, I think, like 50 laws that explicitly discriminate against Israeli Arabs, but they do have like some degree of rights. They can, they
vote, but only if they're in Israel. They can't. The thing that affects them most is being in the West Bank, but because the West Bank nominally has its own government, you could say, they have their own government. They're separate, even though all of Israel's policies directly affect the Palestinian territories.
Right. And the settlers, right? Or the Jewish settlers, and not all of them are like religious fanatics. A lot of them are like immigrants from like the former Soviet Union who have nothing, and housing is subsidized for settlers in the West Bank, right? Like Tel Aviv is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in, but you can get a house for a lot cheaper in like an illegal settlement in the West Bank, like in Ariel, for example. But you have all the rights of an Israeli citizen if you're a Jewish person who lives in a settlement in the West Bank. But the Palestinians, who often live across the wall that was built in 2001, which Zionists like say, oh, actually, most of it's just a fence, which is like an insane argument on its own. But it's also like it's a wall in all the population centers, right? So for the vast majority of people who live in the West Bank, their experience of it is as a wall. So, but
this just
but the people on the other side of the wall can't vote in Israeli elections. They when they're arrested by the Israeli military, they're tried in military courts, which have like a 99% conviction rate. So even we talk about the 1,000 Palestinians who are in Israeli prisons without charges. Even the ones who've been convicted, which is essentially everyone who's been charged with something, was in a military court. You don't get to see the evidence against you. You're tortured, right? I mean, Israel's been practicing torture for like 50 years at least. And so, I mean, I mean, ultimately, these are people who are kidnapped too.
I mean, I think it just goes to the consistent illusion of symmetry, right? The idea that Palestinians have technical legal control over their territories masks the idea that Israel has functional control. They basically govern the territories through military imposition, which is
right. They just have like they have the Palestinian Authority, which acts as their proxies to arrest Palestinians. That's their job. The Palestinian Authority isn't allowed to protect Palestinians from Israelis. Their job is to protect Israelis from Palestinians and to arrest Palestinians. And then Gaza, of course, you have an open air prison where Israel controls what comes in, what goes out, the water, as we know, the electricity, fuel, the airspace, the
cement,
the coasts,
medicine,
the coasts where they I mean, if you're a Palestinian fisherman and you go out and fish and you go past the sort of maximum
you go back to like 9 nautical miles or something.
You get shot. You get shot, right? And people say, oh, well, why can't the Palestinians resist non-violently? And
they did. They
have many times.
But it's also the big march, the March for Peace, the Right of Return thing.
The March of Return. And also, even before Israel was created, during the Arab Revolt, when the British were like facilitating this Jewish colonization of Palestine, there were mass strikes, and the first Intifada was mostly nonviolent. Also, a lot of labor action involved in that. But also the Israelis will, like, I mean, when you have a massive group of people, one person gets violent and it's like, oh, this was a violent assault, and it ignores what everybody else there was doing. And then it tells people, you're not, like, violence is the answer, right? And violence begets violence. And I think the events of the past week show how true that is, and especially when one side has all the cards and one side has all the power.
I mean, that's the trick, is making people see that. I think the problem is the illusion that these people are on equal footing, and usually say, when you point out just the incredible gap between just body count between Palestinians and Israelis, or amount injured, or their relative rights, they say, oh, well, the Palestinians the Arab countries surround Israel. They're under threat. So, who's the real underdog here, which is, belies a very narrow understanding. Okay, even if they're allied, the numbers, you can see the disproportionate numbers, right? But they just don't pay attention to that because I don't understand why. I don't know. I guess because but that's the number one thing. Once people's illusion of the symmetry starts slipping away and they realize just how much it is a larger, more aggressive, more militarily backed entity, more financially backed entity, especially by the US and Europe. Once people start thinking about that and start discovering the asymmetry, that's when the wheels start turning and they realize it is a situation comparable to apartheid or indigenous the killing of indigenous people in the Americas, or any other examples of settler colonialism. And what's really it is this seemingly last vestige of 19th century style settler colonialism that goes on today, because most people have moved on to like different, like trickier types of colonialism, like the IMF or something like that. But this is the straight up like Germany and Angola doing terrible things type of settler colonialism, or Congo free state type settler colonialism, like where it's just overt violence and suppression and torture.
Just like pushing out the natives. And right, I mean, it's the frontier, right? And that's why, I mean, the cause of the Palestinians, I mean, resonates so widely in the developing world. Because they see that they're going through exactly what their people went through throughout history, and that's why you see it votes at the UN. The developing countries don't give a shit about Ukraine. They don't care about NATO and Russia's proxy war. They want freedom for Palestine.
I mean, it's very who supported Nelson Mandela? Cuba. Who didn't? Israel.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you seen the video. I saw them circulating on like Instagram of Nelson Mandela being grilled on American TV about because he was very close with Yasser Arafat. I mean, he called him a comrade, and he reiterated that on the TV. He's like, look, the ANC has many Jewish people involved with us. We think Jewish people are a very important community in South Africa, just as they're an important community in the United States. We support Israel's right to exist within secure borders, which, sure.
You
agree to disagree on that.
Say the line,
Yeah. He's like, but we have a very specific definition of secure borders, and that does not include the West Bank or Gaza or the Golan Heights. And the Palestinian cause is very important to us as South Africans. And I mean, you see that. I mean, the ANC, which is, I mean, a very like corrupt rump of what it was, but is very pro-Palestinian. I mean, Archbishop Tutu said that Archbishop Tutu said that in many ways what Israel's doing is worse than apartheid. Right.
And it's funny, when you see libs saying like, oh, to call it apartheid, that's a misnomer. No, the guys that actually went through apartheid are calling it apartheid. It's they see the similarities.
And it's funny. I remember right after Tutu died, Jason Kenney tweeted out about how he was like an amazing person and such an inspiration and all this. And then a few weeks later, he was like, we're introducing the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, under which Tutu would be an anti-Semite. Because Kenny explicitly said, look, lots of people criticize Israel, Israelis criticize Israel, that's fine. But when you vilify Israel, when you accuse them of apartheid, that's anti-Semitism. And it's like, you were just saying what a great person Archbishop Desmond Tutu was like weeks ago, you fucking weasel.
Freaking weasel. I mean, that's the other thing too. Like, the which makes me uneasy about Israel is the evangelical or the Christian or the Catholic devotion to it, where I mean, especially like the evangelical Christian Mike Pence people who want to round up all the Jews like Pokemon and put them in Israel so the second coming of Jesus will happen. And it's like, these are the people. And I mean, also just like, who is the biggest threat to the Jews in North America, right? It's the Tiki Torch people, right?
Yeah.
The Jews will not replace us people. And their leader is Donald Trump, who, surprise, surprise, loves AIPAC, is buddy with Israel,
Yeah, and that's the thing, because Donald Trump also believes all the anti-Semitic stereotypes, but he thinks they're good, right?
Yeah.
Because he, but yeah, actually, it's interesting. Someone pointed out to me today, a friend here in Edmonton, that there's a Ukraine rally downtown. There's a Palestine rally like up north, where a lot of Arabs live in Edmonton, but downtown there was a Ukraine rally, and someone was waving an UPA flag, like the blood and soil, like black and red flag. And there's Palestine rally, and I can guarantee you all these Jewish groups were fucking surveilling that Palestine rally to make sure every sign was totally peaceful and something that they can't like twist to show that they're all a bunch of violent savages. Meanwhile, someone's literally waving like a Nazi collaborator flag in downtown Edmonton, and they're not going to say shit. And that's also been a really funny thing on seeing this all unfold on Twitter. Is all the Ukraine flag emojis who stand with Israel. They stand with Israel. Again, the Palestinians need to stop occupying Israel.
Yeah. Well, they don't accept that the Ukrainian military is filled with people with black sun tattoos. They think that's all propaganda.
Right.
They think that's all Russian disinformation.
Yeah. And did you see that fake image that was going around? It was like, I knew it was fake, but it was so funny that I shared it and being like, this can't be real, of the Stepan Banderas statue.
With the Israeli flag projected. Yeah, that was fake, but it's like...
but I was like, that's too on the nose.
Yeah, well, it's I think on the Brandenburg Gate, there was an Israeli flag, which is also, that was a real one, which is also just, let's show Hitler this. I wonder what Hitler would think.
Well, yeah, I think he would be
maybe a little enthusiastic. Oh, they all
found a place we can send all the Jews to. That's amazing.
And they're killing Arabs. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's 2 for 1.
Yeah, it's like.
Well, and also Benjamin Netanyahu said that Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews, but he met with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Al-Amin al-Husseini, I believe his name was. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. And it was Husseini who convinced him, actually, no, you need to kill the Jews because otherwise they'll come here. Which, I mean, that's Holocaust now. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? In the fucking...
I think Bibi should be an anti-Semite under the IRA definition,
funny how that doesn't apply to him.
It's fine. It's fine if you're doing it for Israel. It's fine if you're doing it for
exactly.
I mean, I think that's it's sort of embodied in like the national martial art style of Krav Maga, of like crotch kicks, eye gouges. Forget about any type of honor or fighting, or we're fighting dirty. I think that's sort of the general thing. We can do anything because we've suffered for 5,000 years, and this is some sort of strange cosmic revenge.
I mean, the Israelis announced yesterday, in advance of this ground invasion they're going to launch, in the next few days, I'm sure, that they're loosening the rules of engagement. Yeah. And like, I mean, based on past experience, the IDF's rules of engagement are already pretty fucking loose. Yeah. Which is that if you feel you're in danger, just fucking shoot at anyone. And so, I mean, it's going to be real bad. But have we thought about the real victim in all of this?
Who is the real victim in all of this?
Amy Schumer.
Oh yeah, I saw that post where she said she copied the Niemöller poem, where she said, I did Black Lives Matter. I did Black Lives Matter and I supported gay people, but no one supported me because I am Jewish and thus permanently associated. And it had a black star of David. Yeah, just, a perfect, I mean, everybody's coming out of the woodwork. And Tara Strong the voice of Twilight Sparkle on My Little Pony, the voice of Timmy Turner on Fairly Odd Parents, was saying some crazy racist stuff. Like, you know, even beyond the usual dumbass celebrity response.
Bartlow's back.
Yeah, Bartlow is back. Yeah, where she's back saying very positive stuff about Hitler, or saying also doing weird Holocaust reviews.
Well, and that was my. I mean, there are people, right, like Fartlow, like Michael Shermer.
Yeah.
Here in Canada, Candace Malcolm, who used to work for the Conservative government. Now she runs this far-right news site called True North. We were saying that this is worse than the Holocaust. What Hamas did to Israel, which is like so like. I mean,
First
people are losing.
No.
Yeah.
Just how? Just the numbers are off. That's the thing.
Because they're saying
tell the difference between big numbers and small numbers. 6 million versus 1,200 is not.
The best thing is that Michael Shermer, of course, is famously skeptic. Right, he found Skeptic magazine, so you'd think he'd be a bit skeptical of this hysteria, but I guess
it's funny how the guys from like Reason magazine or like Skeptic magazine, they all have oddly status quo like takes for some reason.
Yeah, well, like he's skeptical of the idea that there's no correlation between IQ and race. Right, that's what he's skeptical of, or like that phrenology isn't legitimate science. He's skeptical of that, right? But I mean, and what their point, and it's so idiotic that I feel gross like saying it, but for your listeners, it's that the Nazis tried to hide what they were doing to Jews, whereas Hamas is like broadcasting it openly. And it's like, that's because there wasn't the internet during the Nazis'
and
reign.
The Nazis didn't even do that. The reason why Holocaust denial is so stupid is because they took the most efficient notes out of any mass killing that had been taken up to that time. You know, they did broadcast it essentially in their many books and registers.
Yeah, it's that people in America and in Britain and Canada and the Allied countries didn't care.
Yeah,
they didn't care. Right, Henry Ford had a lot of power, and he was like, "No, we should stay out of this." This Hitler guy makes a lot of good points, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I mean, now we have Elon Musk, who is hanging out with Benjamin Netanyahu not that long ago, which makes you wonder. There's some conspiracies
some sort of manipulation on Twitter or something like that. Who knows? We can't speculate on that. Either way,
but it's fun too.
We've talked about this a lot, and I think we should just start to end it now, just to come to a conclusion. I mean, we'll talk a bit more, but I want to make it clear. We've been talking about our Jewish identity for this whole thing, because I think it's important to establish, as Jews, we are against Zionism. We are against the occupation of Palestine. But just for the last bit, I think we need to focus on just the terror that has been rained on the Palestinians these last couple of days, and especially translating to this 9/11 like fervor that has resulted in what many people are comparing to like that post 9/11 Islamophobia, such that today in Chicago, I'm sure you heard that story about that child getting stabbed by his landlord to death.
Which is so like that hits so many fucking. It's like that story like. That hits so many buttons for me, like a landlord killing his tenant because he's Palestinian, because this landlord probably was seeing posts about how Hamas called for October 13th to be this day of jihad, which you can watch the video of Khaled Mashal, the former founder of Hamas, calling in. He's not a good guy, but he was calling for people across the Arab world. In the Muslim world, rather, to protest in support of Palestine. That's it. And then all these pro-Israel accounts like took it. And that's this new thing I'm seeing is where, like, I don't know if you saw this fucking radiologist freak in Toronto, David Jacobs, took a Nora Loretto tweet where she was clearly saying that by the same logic that there are no civilians in Gaza, you could make an even more compelling case that there are no civilians in Israel, because serving in the military is mandatory. And this guy screenshots this tweet with the, like, you can see the context, and then posted, say, oh my God, Nor Loretto is saying that there are no Israeli civilians. And I've noticed that pattern of these people just sharing something that clearly isn't what they say it is, and just rage baiting. And that was the case with this too. I mean, people were posting the video, Khaled Mishal, saying, oh, he's calling for a Dave jihad against Jewish people all over the world. And it's, you watch the video and it's like,
and all this is not is Muslim deaths. It's just like after 9/11, how there were a bunch of assaults and Islamophobia just became
and I saw
reckoning in the U.S.
And I mean, I don't want to center ourselves again as Jews, but I just like, I saw so many people, people who are like otherwise reasonable and probably not so enthusiastic about Israel, being like, wow, I'm really scared to be a Jew in Toronto now.
These fucking pussies. I hate them so much. It's like, you are the most secure you've ever been in your history. You are in a miracle place. I mean, it's like that thing we were talking about Chomsky earlier. Why do you need Israel when you have New York and LA? He was right. This is paradise for us.
Well, what Chomsky said was actually that the context of that quote was he was talking about how all these Zionists were saying, oh, what do Palestinians need a state for? They can just live in Jordan. And he said, well, by that logic, you could say Jews don't need Israel because they have New York. And then Alan Dershowitz in his book did like an ellipses and was like, Jews don't need Israel because they have New York. Noam Chomsky. Which is, but yeah, I mean, it's true.
Thing is, I agree with that, though. That statement. It's not for the Palestinians, but we didn't do settler colonialism. It was pre-done for us here, which is like another conversation.
Yeah, but we benefited from it.
Yeah, we absolutely benefited from it. But in that sense, it's like, this is a place where Jews are, where you're not expected to serve in the military. There's not this paranoid threat of violence that's on you constantly, at least not as much in a situation where, you're surrounded constantly, right? Like, why don't you see North America as the promised land, right? I don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, fucking listen to the Grateful Dead, right? Like, or Bruce Springsteen. Like, that's the promised land. That's the actual promised land.
There you go, right?
And of course, I mean, same problems as Israel. It's just Israel's in an earlier phase of wiping out population, and I think that's why it's so jarring for us, especially in Canada, where we've had this like national reckoning with the what we did to Indigenous children in residential schools. By the way, Israel had residential schools for Jewish, like Mizrahi Jews from the Arab world, to like de-Arabize them.
There you go.
Like Yemeni Jews. No, people don't know that. And that's again, Israel, because Israel is bad for Jews too, right? And then but yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, to sort of like, for us as Jewish people to sort of separate like our own experiences of Zionism and what it's done to us and as a collective from what it's done to the Palestinians, because our understanding of what it's done to us is based on what it's doing to the Palestinians, right? And that does, I think, need to be the focus. And I mean the situation in Gaza now, right? So brutal terrorist attack from Hamas, still a lot unknown about it. But they weren't beheading babies, and it doesn't seem like they were raping anyone.
They were doing regular monstrous stuff, not extremely monstrous.
They were like shooting up places, which is bad on its own. You don't need to engage in
they were doing bad murders, but so why do you need to exaggerate? That's always the frustrating thing, is like, I would believe you if you're saying they're doing the killing. It seems like odd to add on this additional stuff, but
and now it's funny because I was people like on Twitter and stuff, and I know a lot of them are bots now and stuff. Like, I was like saying, "There's no way this happened. The beheading babies. Where's the proof?" And I saw on CNN the host was like, "Oh my God, we've just this is just in that Hamas beheaded babies. Wow, I guess this host on CNN literally said, I guess that means there's not going to be a ceasefire, because how can you negotiate with someone who does this?" And then they retract
Joe fucking Biden said he saw the pictures of beheaded babies, and then
and I was like, oh, whoops, no, we didn't. And then Antony Blinken goes to Israel, meets with Netanyahu. Netanyahu shows him pictures of like dead babies, not beheaded babies. And I can't. It does feel gross making this distinction, but it is important to deconstruct the propaganda. And then it becomes, all these people were denying that Hamas killed babies, and it's like, no, we're denying that they were like, remember, they're saying worse than ISIS.
That's part of the strategy.
ISIS never beheaded babies. They beheaded adults. And then suddenly it's like, oh, you support killing children. You're fine with killing children as long as they weren't beheaded. It's just because how the propaganda shifts into different gears once it's been debunked.
It's because killing someone in a military operation is somewhat understandable, but like if you behead the babies and you rape people, then you're animalistic at that point. And then anything can be done to you.
So Israel's response to this is cuts out the water, the electricity, the fuel from Gaza, tells Palestinians if they don't want to die to go to Egypt, which is, I mean, right there, that's ethnic cleansing.
They're trying to do
it's exactly what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh like weeks ago, right? Where Azerbaijan said, we were bombing the shit out of here, go to Armenia. And no one and again, the entire Armenian population there, almost the entire Armenian population fled to Armenia. And none of them I've seen interviewed have any illusion that they're going to be allowed back. And the Armenian government doesn't want them because Armenia is not a wealthy country, and they've just suddenly got an influx of 120,000 people, and so I mean, in 60% of Azerbaijan's weapons purchases from 2017 to 2020, when the data is available, there's a really good CNN report on it, like before this all took place. Because, now if they reported on that, I would be like, oh, this is a blood libel. Came from Israel. Israel sold Azerbaijan 60% of its weapons that committed ethnic cleansing with. Netanyahu saw the world, no one gave a shit. Everyone just shrugged, right? Most people probably haven't even heard of it.
Azerbaijan, who just committed an ethnic cleansing when the Hamas attack happened, were like, I stand with Israel.
And Zelensky, remember, as the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh was happening, Zelensky was like, thank you so much to the president of Azerbaijan, whose name I forget, for standing with Ukraine. And I mean, and these things are all interconnected, right? Is I think a point I wanted to make. But then I clearly saw that like the world just kind of shrugged and moved on from it. And I think it's a bit different though when you're the Holy Land. I mean,
there's a lot more eyes on you. And also this is something that has been in the back of people's minds for years and years and years, was popularly activated by the Sheikh Jarrah stuff in 2018. And
2021, I believe.
2021.
Because then always, whenever people start focusing on this time it's different, but many of the other previous attacks on Gaza over the past 15 years, when people started paying attention to the situation in the West Bank, which is just, again, straight up like old school colonialism for Jerusalem, they would just start attacking Gaza and then make it about Gaza and how that this is like Hamas are like the Nazis and we need to you got punch Nazis, right?
There's a place that we can always go to where people live much, much more desperately and thus are more likely to do violence. So we can always poke that beehive and then say, oh no, we're under attack.
But and so they told Palestinians go to Egypt. Bombed the crossing into Egypt. They bombed the shit out of the crossing into Egypt after telling Palestinians to go to Egypt. And then they said, oh yeah, half of you are going to have to, Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. Actually, Jerusalem is actually more densely populated than Gaza, which is interesting. The difference is if you're Jewish, you can leave, you can come and go from Jerusalem. If you're Palestinian, you can't. But you can definitely go, but you can't.
You can't. That's the problem, is they'll they'll pay you to go. Well, they won't pay you to go. They'll want you to go, but you can't come back.
Yeah, that's why it's very easy to get for a Palestinian to get like a long-term like travel permit
Mm-hmm.
than to actually go to like their ancestral homes, because if they're gone for too long, the Israelis will be like, oh, your house is ours now.
Yeah.
Here's Michael Horowitz from Brooklyn's new home. But then they said, yeah, now half of you need to relocate to the already overcrowded south of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And or is it north?
No, they wanted everyone was relocating to the south from the north, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And and then in everyone who isn't a fucking mark was like, that is impossible. You can't have more than 1 million people relocate in this tiny strip of land in 24 hours. They said 24 hours.
Yeah.
Like they're a fucking like Batman villain.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously, and one of the I think it was the Palestinian Red Crescent Society said, we're staying.
Yeah.
We're staying. Like, and I mean, that is,
well, because then
that's heroism.
Yeah, they'll tell you to go somewhere, and then they'll bomb the place where you go as well, because that's a thing they did with in Sheikh Jarrah too, where they said, we are going to bomb this part of Gaza on Twitter. Then everyone reposted it saying, oh, don't go to this part, thought they were doing well, thought they were warning, but then a bunch of people went to another part, which they then bombed.
Yeah, and I always notice, like, when I think, like, I remember when they shot up the Turkish aid ship in, like, when was that? Like 2011?
Yeah.
Maybe the flotilla. And it's just like, how are Zionists going to defend this? And they always find a way, because it's the same fucking 5 talking points. So now they're saying that this blatant act of ethnic cleansing is actually great. Like we're telling them to flee where we're away from where we're bombing. Isn't that wonderful? And of course, none of these people are interested in what the people there actually want to do, right? Because they know their homes aren't coming back. Like, that's it. They're going to flatten northern Gaza.
Yeah.
And just today I saw they so graciously turned the water back on.
Yeah, but they didn't turn the electricity back on, so they can't do the pumps.
Yeah, and they also bombed a bunch of the pumps. So, they always like to do these little PR stunts.
We treat them so humanely. We could have killed them all. We gave back Sinai. We're so humane,
Yeah, and like they gave back Sinai so to neutralize Egypt, so they could like expand into the West Bank more, and due to Lebanon. I mean, what Israel's doing to Gaza now is very similar to what it did to Beirut in the 80s, right? Like placing it under siege, and like a complete siege, and just bombing the shit out of it. The difference was they had like local proxies in Lebanon who did the like really horrific stuff, like the Sabra Shatila massacre, like cutting pregnant women's stomachs out and taking the baby out and shooting the woman, which apparently, according to some Twitter account, Hamas did. And then when someone asked, how do you know this? And they're like, oh, my friend who's in the army told me. Don't trust me, bro.
Yeah.
And
it's like, you just recounted the details of the Sabra Shatila massacre, which people know because they're especially horrific.
Yeah, and they're like incredibly well documented, right? I mean, 1,700 Palestinians killed in 2 days, right? Like, and it took the Israelis watched as they did it, and it took them 2 days to be like, all right, that's enough.
Yeah.
And I mean, now they're preparing for a ground invasion, and so they're literally throwing young Israelis into a meat grinder to participate in this genocidal war. Mind you, a lot of these young Israelis think they're doing a good thing, so that's an unfortunate reality. But I mean, it's just going to get like so much worse. And frankly, I don't think it's going to end until Israeli soldiers start being killed, and then the Israeli public will say, like, why are you killing our kids, like in Lebanon? And yeah, I mean, I'm not, yeah, I don't know, it's really bleak,
It
and
is really bleak at this situation, but do not despair. The Palestinians do not give up, so you should
yeah,
not either. The most immediate thing you can do is, of course, donate to the organizations we said at the top of the top of the episode. But also, if you have friends that are on the fence about this, that these are the people who you can talk to. People that are like, "Oh no, isn't it complicated?" If you have knowledge and are somewhat passionate, you don't necessarily have a moral obligation to change these people's minds, but it's good if you find someone where the propaganda hasn't really got to them yet. You can basically get to them first. And I think if you're doing that, that's some small way that you can change political messaging around this. Other than that, we pay for this, so you can pressure political people. You can write to them, you can organize, you can go along with people to show up at offices, you can move bodies. There are things you can do. I know that you have this overwhelming sense of powerlessness because our governments are making us complicit in this terrible thing right now, but you cannot give up the fight, because they do not, and we have it much easier. So don't despair, get mad, and get determined.
yeah. And I think that's an important point you make too, because especially when there's, I mean, again, France criminalized Palestine solidarity rallies. You have here in Canada the government saying that these are pro-Hamas rallies, and they're celebrating terrorism. Like, go out there, and the more people the better. Like, you know what I mean? Like, show that you won't be intimidated by this fake narrative that these people are just celebrating the massacre of civilians and not objecting to the massacre that's happening right now, and the daily subjugation of Palestinians that happens when the guns aren't blazing.
And not to mention the historical massacres, which greatly outnumber the death tolls of any Israeli of Israel. So I think that, Jeremy, thank you for coming on to talk about this. You can follow him on Twitter. He's got a book. It's good. Don't want to plug too much because that seems a little crass, but follow Jeremy on Twitter, and that links to all of his stuff. Please, if you can, donate to the organizations mentioned at the top of the episode, or do your research and find anyone that appears to be legit. And it just, I know it seems like throwing money at this is sort of vague and disconnected from any actual thing, but it actually does help. So one of the few times I will advocate for charitable giving. These Palestinian organizations, there doesn't seem to be as much graft as with other charitable organizations. So I feel I can endorse them. So PCRF, MAP, ANIRA, the UN one you mentioned, and please support a
Palestinian Red Crescent Society.
Yeah, Palestinian Red Crescent Society, all good choices. Please do that. And thank you for coming on, Jeremy, to talk about this serious subject, which you have much greater knowledge of than me. So it really helped out.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a while since I've been on this show, and my have you grown. And it's been really great to see a lot of people becoming fans of your work, which I've been, since the beginning. So I'm really grateful that you had me on your show, and to talk about this issue with someone also who I've always seen eye to eye on it. And I think this was a valuable discussion, and I think it needs to be happening more among Jews. And I'm seeing it start. I do think that this is being a catalyst for change. It's just whether that change can come before it's too late. And just got to do what you can.
Yeah. And so, yeah, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and here's two Jews who will tell you that.
Yeah.
And
From the river to the sea,
Palestine will be free.